Welcome to the Feisworld Podcast, engaging conversations that cross the boundaries between business, art, and the digital world.
Chris Voss is a retired FBI special agent of 24 years who specialized in international hostage negotiation. In 2008, Chris founded a business negotiation consulting firm called the Black Swan Group, which offers services and learning opportunities to anyone who needs to negotiate, persuade, or influence. Personally, I have struggled with negotiation in business for nearly a decade. After reading Chris's book, Never Split the Difference, I was eager to put him on the show. Everything we've previously been taught about negotiation is wrong. You are not rational. There is no such thing as fair. Compromise is the worst thing you can do. The real art of negotiation lies in mastering the intricacies of no, not yes. Whether you have been told that you are already a good negotiator, or if you find negotiation intimidating and uncomfortable, this episode will help you refine your tactics and break through the barriers.
Because first of all, anytime the word yes is involved in a conversation, you are in a negotiation. The most dangerous negotiation is one you don't know you're in. You combine empathy with the ability to say no, you get an incredibly powerful negotiator. And that's really where I'm trying to get people to go. I'm trying to get them to do both. And if in Ranger School, if he could laugh once during that day, he was going to get through that day. And that's, again, laughter lightening us up and making us stronger and more resilient. Be playful and courageous with this stuff. You will have so much fun trying this stuff out. Don't take yourself hostage. Have fun with it and bring some great stuff into your life.
This is your host, Fei Wu, and welcome to another episode of the Feisworld Podcast. Chris Voss and I discussed many interesting questions, such as how does he create a playful and relaxing atmosphere for teaching negotiation? Why is it a bad idea to wait for yes or you're right during a conversation? Do you have a few minutes to chat? Turns out to be a terrible pitch when you're trying to get people's attention and respect their time. If you enjoy this podcast, please leave your comment on feisworld.com and share this podcast with your family and friends. Your support will always keep us on track and bring many more sung and unsung heroes to this podcast. By the way, if you're using Facebook on a regular basis, you can find us at feisworld.com/Feisworld. Without further ado, please welcome Chris Voss. All right, so Chris, I'm really excited to welcome you to Feisworld. I've read so much about you. I am midway through your book, which we'll talk about it certainly as a theme of this podcast, but to introduce you to my audience, you're an adjunct professor at Georgetown University's Business School. You're also a professor at the business school called Marshall School of Business at University of Southern California, teaching negotiation in the MBA program. You also taught the course International Business Negotiation at Harvard University. And so before this, you spent 24 years as the FBI special agent, as the lead international kidnapping negotiator from 2003 to 2007. And after you retired, you founded the Black Swan Group, which is a negotiation consulting firm. And so welcome. Wow, what an accomplishment.
Thank you very much. Yeah, and my firm also is applying hostage negotiation to business. So we don't do any sort of hostage negotiation per se anymore. It's all business negotiation. So thank you very much. I'm happy to be on.
So I must tell you that initially when I read your profile, I had somehow assumed that you'll be intimidating to talk to. And, you have this wealth of knowledge that many of us, simply do not have access to. But after watching your Google video talking about your book, Never Split the Difference, I actually find you very nurturing and very attentive to the audience as well as the interviewer, who, if you remember, was clearly well prepared but a bit nervous at the time, facing a room full of audience. So, I was wondering, how do you design this approach, in teaching your students and creating such atmosphere?
Well, yeah, and that's a great point because I think it's very important. Nurturing is one description. I mean, I'm just and encouraging and positive and, even occasionally playful because I know I like it for two reasons, what I call the missionary and the mercenary. All right, so the mercenary in me, I like it because it actually makes me smarter and it makes you smarter. And we'll both think together better collaboratively if I'm encouraging, if we have fun, if you enjoy this. It helps me in a strictly mercenary sense. I'll get a better deal. The missionary in me, because, I want you to feel better about having interacted with me. I want you to feel better as a human being. I want you to want to do business with me again and look forward to it. So, yeah, it's very intentional on my part because it does make me feel good, and I like making my counterpart feel good, and it's also profitable at the same time.
Definitely. And one message that you've shared multiple times that really resonated with me is, don't wait for someone to say you're right or try to outsmart the other person, partner, or person who's in the negotiation situation with you. And it's interesting that so much of my time spent in business in the past 10 years. By the way, I work in advertising and marketing as a producer. And now, since the beginning of this year, I started my own company, Feisworld Inc. I noticed that now, more so than ever, with my own business, I really have to embrace your teaching and make sure that I'm not in the room and trying to outsmart everybody or, as long as I bring them along with me, I am that much more successful.
Yeah. For a lot of reasons. They're not going to like it if they feel outsmarted. They're not going to want to cooperate with you. They're going to feel like if you outsmart them, you make them feel stupid. And who wants to do business with someone that makes them feel stupid? And then, I said recently, I read recently where somebody wrote, if you're the smartest person in the room, you're in the wrong room. So you want to be around people that are smarter than you anyway, because how else are you going to learn? So, yeah, and that's one of the real problems with negotiation, people's negotiation stories. Like when they find out that I help get people better at negotiation, so many people have said, oh, let me tell you about this negotiation. Boy, I had them over a barrel. And I thought, wow, you made an enemy. That's not good for business long term. You don't stay in business making enemies.
Yeah, a lot of your teaching is counterintuitive, which makes me even more intrigued to listen and to actually pay attention to the details, your beliefs, and what do you recommend against. One thing that I started kind of giggling a little bit as I'm watching the video, also the Google one, which I recommend. I would certainly make the link very accessible through this podcast as well, is
Thank you.
you use the example, one of my favorites is, do you have a few minutes to talk? I laugh because I say that all the time. Whether I'm cold calling someone or even when I'm calling a friend casually, and and then you basically intrigue my mind to say, how long is a few minutes? You make people think about, first of all, it's never a few minutes. Do I even want to talk to you? So could you elaborate on that a little bit more?
Yeah, and that's a classic one. While what we mean and what is so well intended is just so wrong. Because we're saying that because we're trying to respect the other person and we're trying to demonstrate respect and appreciation for their time. And the opposite is the truth because like every single question we ask, we're hoping that someone says yes. Yes is commitment, so they always worry about what they let themselves in for if they say yes. What's going to happen to me if I say yes? And that's the sort of stuff that clouds people's minds and gets in the way. And do you have a few minutes to talk? Breaks down to no less than 4 questions. It's if I have a few minutes, do I want to talk to you? And if I have a few minutes and I want to talk to you, do I want to talk about what you want to talk about? And then how long is a few minutes? And we both, everybody knows people that a few minutes is 45.
So true.
And then finally the last one is, how do I get off the phone? And you can't think while you can't listen to the other person while all this stuff is going through your mind. I first saw this a long time ago when someone in hostage negotiation, they were demonstrating what's it like to negotiate with a schizophrenic. It was a voice going in their head while you're trying to talk to them. And if you plant these sorts of questions in someone's mind while you're talking, then it's the same as talking to a schizophrenic. And it's so common. I was sitting with a former colleague from the Department of State the other day, and he'd been retired for a long time, and I hadn't seen him since before I started the business. So he goes, yeah, I took a negotiation course, and they said there are 3 things you got to do, and the first thing is you got to make sure the other side understands your position. Well, again, that's like talking to a schizophrenic, because anytime the other side is more focused on getting you to listen and what they have to say, or what they're worried about what you're saying is going to let them into, you're wasting your time. And so triggering yes in people's minds, or trying to trigger yes, creates all this noise in their head, and it's just so bad.
And you just reminded me what I wrote down on the piece of paper as I was listening to one of your podcasts yesterday. You said understanding does not equal to agreement.
Right.
I never thought of this that way, because I noticed exactly as you said, when the other person trying to convince me to make me say yes or make me agree, I'm already turned off, especially when we have different positions or different understandings. But it's often very effective mentally, and it's really a lot easier to listen to the person as the person just simply paying attention, trying to understand where you're coming from, even if he or she doesn't agree with you.
That's a really great point too, because it's how we accidentally turn other people off, how we turn them off from listening to us, and then if we turn them off from listening to us, they're never going to collaborate with us. We're never going to reach an agreement. We're never going to reach an understanding where we both want to proceed forward together. So all the little ways that are counterintuitive that turn the other side off is getting out of that.
In terms of during your teaching, whether it's in a business setting or day-to-day lives, do you see other common examples or observations for mistakes that people make that they're not even aware of?
Yeah, well, I think the first 2 biggest ones is turning the other side off by either trying to get them to say yes, or we're hammering them so hard for yes, then the other side is saying you're right, you're right, you're right. And we joke about that in my company. We always say that you're right is the equivalent of F you. Only, it's F you, but in a nice way. Like, I love you, but F off. But I still love you. And then the other biggest thing is people taking themselves hostage in advance. And they'll take themselves hostage in advance usually by being so determined that if they hear anything other than a yes, they become a hostage to yes. And they don't want to hear anything else. Or what I see a lot is being a hostage of no, and they say, well, they're going to say no to that. That's a non-starter, so we'll never bring it up. And like, if you always knew what the other person was going to say, then you'd have more money than Warren Buffett. So, but we always tell ourselves, oh, I know what they're going to say. I know how they're going to react. This is a non-starter. I hate that so much, because first of all, you don't know, which means you just left money on the table by not asking. And then secondly, all right, so if they say no, let's see how we can take the no to our advantage, and we'll feed it into something else. And so, yeah, okay, so they'll say no to this, but we can move on. We won't burst into flames. No one will burst into flames here. But they become so afraid to find out, they take themselves hostage. And I hate when people won't find out.
So this is really interesting. I want to dissect people into a couple of groups. So, for instance, men and women share many traits and habits, but just wondering, have you noticed any differences between the ways that they negotiate, men versus women?
Well, I'll get into it, but I hate it at the same time, because to use the F word fair, I think anytime you start talking about differences or whether somebody's better or worse at something, if you say somebody's better at something, that leaves the door open to say they're naturally worse. Mm. And I don't think that's fair. Mm-hmm. I think women are socialized more to be more close to be empathic. Mm-hmm. Women are socialized to be sympathetic, which is not the same thing. And when you're sympathetic, you're highly vulnerable. But it's a much shorter step from being sympathetic to empathetic if you can understand the differences. And the basic is there's a difference between seeing it through their eyes or walking in their shoes. If you walk in their shoes, you can feel it, and that's a handicap. But if you can see what they see, it makes you smarter. And actually, it's one of the things that sociopaths are fantastic at. Sociopaths are wonderful at empathy. And, that makes some people freak out. And when I want to start a fight, I'll say, do sociopaths feel empathy? And some people go like, absolutely not. Well, the truth is they absolutely do, because empathy is seeing how you feel. And sociopaths' emotions don't get in their own ways, and they pick apart our emotions pretty fast. Mm-hmm. So I think women are socialized and nurtured to be what is closer to empathy than men are. I think men are nurtured a little more to put up barriers and to say no. So I think when you combine those two things, you combine empathy with the ability to say no, you get an incredibly powerful negotiator. Mm-hmm. And that's really where I'm trying to get people to go. I'm trying to get them to do both. Like if it's taking Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton and Paul Ryan and putting all those characteristics together, and then you've got a dangerous, capable, wonderful negotiator.
I love that.
All those parts.
As you mentioned in your teaching, that this process is not linear. It's not how old you are, what gender are you, sort of to determine what the negotiation tactics are. I love the fact that it's the truth in many teachings and learnings that there is no shortcut. There's no set script to follow. I'm so eager to tell you this story because I notice part of my own learning through negotiation, and before discovering your work, and now I'm just even more enthusiastic to kind of dive into your books and your online courses, is 2 years ago I started the podcast without no prior experience, no training in audio engineering, and without a network of people, who are in the tier ones, let's just say, who can help me attract a lot of audience. On top of that, I am a sort of a double minority. I'm a woman, I am Asian, and I certainly thought for a while to think that, is it even smart for me to do this? How can I possibly use that to my advantage? So over the course of actually less than 2 years, and we're very proud that we were able to introduce a lot of the guests who we never even dreamed of talking to, including yourself, Chris.
Thank you.
So yeah, definitely. Looking back, I certainly had some failures as well, but I really agree with your approach in saying, look, negotiation comes with practice. It's not a skill you're obtain overnight. So, and I see someone like you using negotiation almost as a second nature. And for me personally, now I learn to spend less time dwelling on failures, why that didn't work, but simply to move on. So, how do you coach people who isn't, just saying sort of, they have a lot of anxiety because negotiation to people who are new to this field is kind of uncomfortable, unfamiliar. How do you get them to be comfortable?
Yeah, that's a great question, because the biggest barrier to learning this is not that it's hard to understand, it's that it's uncomfortable, which is kind of crazy, because most of this, even though it's very counterintuitive, it's all pretty simple stuff. But since it's counterintuitive, that means it's different, that means it's uncomfortable. And comfort is the biggest barrier, not complexity. There is some Nobel Prize winning ideas in here. Because if we start talking about the concept of what loss does to people's perceptions, that actually won the Nobel Prize. And if you can wrap your mind around, and it wasn't my idea, I wish it was, Danny Kahneman, who wrote this great book called Thinking Fast and Slow, him and his partner Amos Tversky created a prospect theory, which is about what loss, how it distorts your perceptions. It distorts our perception of reality so much, we refer to it as bending reality. But you don't have to be a Nobel Prize winning scientist to know that a loss stings. Losses hurt. Losses have over impact on how distortive impacts on our thinking. And so that's not complicated. That's just uncomfortable to accept that. Instead of trying to get people to say yes all the time, developing an understanding, that's a discomfort level. That's not a complexity level. So that is the biggest barrier. And once we can get people to start getting better, then the next problem is this comes to people so quickly. Once they get over the comfort thing, getting good at this happens so fast. We say the learning curve is steep, but it's not high. That then people don't realize it can go away just as quickly. That absolutely happened to me when I first got trained. I sort of lost my superpowers over the course of a year. And I went in for a review, and they told me I was horrible. I couldn't believe it. But it came to me so quickly and so naturally once I got it that I didn't feel it going away. And so you have to practice on a regular basis. Yeah, labels especially, labels and mirroring. Repeating the last three words of what someone just said is a mirror. You got to practice that, or you forget to do it. Pretty soon, the whole yes thing will sneak back into your vernacular, and before you know it, you're trying to get people to say yes, and that is just horrible. So it's practice and being willing to get good at it and actually have fun with it.
So for instance, if people are listening to this podcast right now, they're thinking, I want to really start practicing today or tomorrow. And so is it possible for someone to create a situation in their daily lives, such as going to Starbucks and ask for a discount, or, something more practical than that?
Yeah, you can, and you can do it all the time. Because first of all, anytime the word yes is involved in a conversation, you are in a negotiation. The most dangerous negotiation is one you don't know you're in. And there's everybody on the planet, if you talk to anybody at all, you probably had 5 conversations today, no less. And 3 of those 5 had to have been negotiations. They had to involve the word yes. So it's even as much as taking a step back. If someone's trying to convince you of something, a great label is to say, it sounds like this is important to you. And practice saying that. Not that I'm giving all your listeners the label they could use in almost every conversation. It sounds like this is important to you. And watch to see how the other person reacts. You will see people both simultaneously light up and relax at the same time when you say, it sounds like this is important to you. And then that's a practice. That's a label. That's opening up a conversation. Just do that every day and see what happens. And then try to think of other labels to get people to talk and to get them to flesh things out. And you'll find that actually agreement is usually the number 2 thing people are after. Being understood is usually the number 1 thing, which means if you understand them, they may agree with you.
As I'm listening, I am reflecting upon how I've personally changed in the past 2 years of interviewing people, because I went from feeling very uncomfortable and still very nervous, uncomfortable at times these days, but more experience and know how to calm myself down, is, talking to people for an hour at a time. It's oftentimes on subjects I really know very little about, such as, medicine and such, is I try to open up and I try to be really good listener. And just like you said, I do see people will relax and start telling me more about their lives, their choices, and open up. And that's when the podcast gets really juicy too.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I think human beings are hardwired to want to talk, and it's just a matter of giving them a chance, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah, I'm very surprised. Even people I thought would speak very little, I have It's interesting. I interviewed a very successful doctor who's female, and her mom contacted me and said, "Wow, I've known my daughter her whole life, and she opened up about these stories I've never even heard of." And I was so surprised to hear that. You know, they're very close.
Let me say also, you've got a natural negotiator's voice.
Do I?
You do. You've actually got that rare voice of both a natural downward inflection, which is very soothing and calming and approachable. But every time you smile, I can tell because I can hear it in your voice.
Wow.
And that feels good to the listener. Like we can't see each other, and when you smile, it makes me want to smile. And that's those two things together are dynamite. That gets people talking.
You make me so happy, Chris, because originally I really wanted to turn on the camera, but sometimes depending on the connection, it reduces the quality of the voice recording. I love that sort of eye to eye exchange. So we'll do a little bit of that in the end because I find your presence also very powerful. And I paid attention to the interviews on YouTube that you've conducted that you are always communicating with your eyes. And when you're talking to people and when they're talking to you, I feel like they have your full attention and they're very engaged, even as interviewers.
Yes, I try to be attentive, and yeah, it's because it makes it more enjoyable for both of us, and then who knows what sort of interesting things we're going to discover.
If you don't mind, I'm going to jump around. There's one question I wrote down just before the interview. I realized it's going to be a little challenging to set up. So, a very dear friend of mine very recently lost, tens of thousands of dollars to a very well curated attack acted by multiple people, and this was like basically a bank fraud. And it's very unfortunate, and we're all glad that she's okay. But as I was talking to her, she described these people who now I realize are very, very good in negotiators. And she used words such as she felt almost hypnotized in a way, which we were all very surprised because this woman isn't, doesn't typically respond to such situations, very clear-headed for the most part. And I guess my question is, how is it possible to identify these people who are possibly using their skill to harm others, and how to possibly avoid these situations?
Right. Well, and this gets us right back to a little bit of a point I was making before, and that sociopaths are so good at this. And there was an article that I read recently. Adam Grant wrote, and he's a brilliant writer. He's a couple books out there that I absolutely love, originals and give and take. And he wrote a piece called "The Dark Side of Emotional Intelligence." And my book is operationalized emotional intelligence, and it is ridiculously powerful. And I've always joked, and we've always joked, use your powers for good and not evil. And that's only partially joking, because you do need to be aware of this. Even if you have no intention of using tools of influence that are this powerful, being aware of that to start with helps inoculate you, if you will. And so it's kind of a two-way street. And there are some bargaining techniques that I always talk about in business school. And I say, look, you don't have to do this, but you have to know it's going to be done to you. So you need to at least understand its impact, like high anchoring, somebody coming up with a high price. That's designed to knock you off balance emotionally. And for the average to even the above average negotiator, gives you an advantage to high anchor. With the extremely talented negotiators, high anchoring means nothing. And that triggers a whole separate debate of, what sort of emotional devices are you trying to use on the other person with what skill. But getting back to your question, I think of it in terms of just inoculation. Be aware of what can be done to you. And actually an automatic inoculation you can do is, in order to keep your emotions from being manipulated, focus on the other person's emotions, because that actually puts you in a different mindset. It's sort of compartmentalizing. You become less vulnerable to the mojo that they're putting on you as soon as you start thinking about what's driving them. and I wish I had a scientific explanation of the way the compartmentalization works in our brains. But I know that if I focus very much on what emotion you're feeling in the moment, it automatically turns all of mine down and it reduces my own vulnerabilities.
I have to do some research on that because it's what you said is very powerful and made a lot of sense to me. And I can't wait to share some of this learning and findings with my friend as well. Thank you so much, Chris. I really appreciate
Cool.
that.
Yeah,
Uh,
cool.
so we've learned a lot about negotiation, and I will direct people to, again, the courses in the book. I think it's very well curated. And I do want to learn a little bit more about you. I feel like a lot of the podcasts I've listened to focus on your work, but I think we can't ignore the fact that you chose a very unusual path to become a FBI special agent. But before that all happened, one of my favorite questions is, what was a 10-year-old Chris like? What were you passionate about around that age? I want to find out more.
I think, well, I grew up in a middle class, blue collar, small town Midwestern family. And, we were very strong sense of both hard work and, right and wrong from the very beginning. I think probably as long as I can remember, we had to help. We had to work. I worked for my father. He had a business. He was a hard-working blue-collar guy, very direct, very straightforward. He wanted to teach us work ethic. My mom wanted us to have fun and be kids. And so it was, kind of Midwestern at that time, stay-at-home mom, small town USA. One older sister, two younger. Just running around like a little kid, but with parents that were definitely trying to build me with decent values, but not to the ridiculous extent that some people are doing with kids these days, where they got them studying and training. I mean, there's a female woman businessman here in Los Angeles. She's got her daughter in chess lessons, got her daughter playing tennis, she's got her daughter doing extra study. All I think that does is just make kids annoyed, if not neurotic. And so I lived in just an environment that was, right and wrong, work hard, try to get along well with other people, cut the grass, make your bed.
Did you notice that you used the word superpower? Did you notice or even use the word superpowers to describe some of the talents and skills that you had at the time?
Now, I don't know. Because no, I don't think so. I don't think I was aware of it. I've thought back to this a lot. Like, was there a pivotal moment where I knew that I would be a hostage negotiator? And I don't think so. Other than I can remember one time in particular, I got in trouble. And I lived in a household where Dad had the belt, which was going to get laid across your backside if you got in trouble. And then, of course, when Dad came home, that was what you were scared of. And I remember Mom giving me the choice. She's like, all right, look, I can spank you, your father can spank you. And I thought to myself, well, this is a no-brainer. Ain't no way you can hit as hard as he can. Plus, I don't even think you have a belt. And so I'm like, sure, go ahead. Yeah, you spank me. And she was like, all right, go to the closet and get the yardstick out. And I was like, whoa, 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 whoa. This changes the equation dramatically. I said, Mom, she's a nice, sweet person. She's not supposed to be laying a hunk of wood across my backside. So
I try so hard to control myself not to laugh.
I guess I learned the nurturing person can bring the wood also at the same time. Maybe I learned that then.
Interesting. So, going from an FBI special agent and creating your own company, but I feel like your life possibly changed a lot between going from a special agent to creating your company. What are some of the areas or more significant changes have you noticed?
Well, as much also from leaving law enforcement training to training out first in universities and then people, I've actually learned a lot more about the value of encouraging people as opposed to being hard on them. And I've spent when you're teaching cops hostage negotiation, it's a tough audience, and I felt like I had to be tough on them. I had to demonstrate competence, but there's an old saying: when you're a cop, if you're confronted with a gang of 5 or 6 guys, all you got to do is beat up the biggest one, and nobody's going to give you a hard time. Which is, that's always easier said than done. But when I was teaching cops, I would pick out the loudest, most annoying cops in a class. I would watch them before class, so I knew who they were. And the smart Alex, the know-it-alls, I'd have them role play in front of me in front of the class. The very first thing I did, and basically verbally just chop them down to size, and consequently get everybody's attention that way. That I don't like that anymore. If I had to go back and do it again, I would do it differently. I would be much more encouraging. So I think in leaving the FBI and coming out into the private sector, I've really grown more to learn the value of positive encouragement for people. And as you mentioned before, checking on data. Now finally we have data that shows that our brain works up to 31% more effectively when we're in a positive frame of mind. So again, this is the missionary in me. We're both happier if I put you in a positive frame of mind, if I joke around with you. If in a negotiation, if I'm trying to get you to give me something, and I say, look, okay, here's my last and final offer. I'll throw in my pet frog. If that makes you laugh, you're going to be more likely to give me the deal. And we'll both enjoy it more, and I'll leave you with a positive residue afterwards, so that when I'm coming back, the last thought in your mind was the smile I put on your face when you last saw me. And I think that's been the biggest change since I left the FBI. I'm much more consciously appreciating how much farther that'll get me. I'll give you a quick story. I spent a lot of time on the street in New York City as an FBI agent in the toughest parts of town by myself. And you learn your street persona, which is kind of like a crocodile persona. Like, if you bother with me, you're going to get bit. And I can put up this vibe, this don't screw with me vibe, in that if you take me on, you might win, but you're going to get hurt in the meantime. And I can put this vibe up. And so now I know when I go through an airport, how a busy airport, how likely people are to bump into you. So if I put up my don't screw with me vibe, no one bumps into me and everyone gets out of my way. And they will get out of my way when they're about 3 feet away from me. They'll feel this intense, dangerous negativity, and they'll move. Now, if I go through the same airport with the same crowd and I have a big smile on my face and I'm projecting, hey, I really like you, you're a great human being, everyone will get out of my way also, but sooner. And they'll get out of my way when they're about 5 or 6 feet away from me, which gives me more space. But now, instead of glaring back at me, I get a return smile. I get more room, I get more latitude, I can get through the airport quicker, and everyone I encountered was made more positive by the experience as opposed to feeling attacked. So I can do that, and I know that a positive reinforcing attitude is much more powerful and gets me much more, than the badass attitude does.
I appreciate the fact that you've taken so many extra steps from you can simply retire, live a comfortable life, but yet you've chosen the opposite of that, and making all these learnings, compiling notes, and make this knowledge accessible to people in everyday lives, and certainly at the business schools that you're teaching at. And I feel like there aren't enough of you doing such things and having your voice out there, in space without people meeting you in person. I feel like it will certainly encourage other people to try to do the same. And I've read some articles about negotiation or there's a book called How to Handle Difficult Conversations when I was working in consulting. And I was in the those books I read a few pages, I'll put it down. But, now I'm halfway through your book is because I have, not just me, but people knowing who you are will have this tremendous respect for what you had lived through. Hostage negotiation, working in the darkest valley in New York City, and you've dealt it with real situations that matter. Sometimes it's life or death matter. So there's a different tone and voice and tactics that you've brought to the world. That's just, in my opinion.
Well, it's for me, it's fun. It's cool. I really enjoy helping people do stuff that they didn't think they could do. And like the first time, I was pretty lucky. I got involved in a real deal hostage negotiation fairly soon after I got trained. And it was the most incredible experience. I mean, it was amazing. And so then whenever we would train a class, there would always be one or two people in that class that would get into something right away. And we'd tell them, I said, you're going to get, somebody in this room is going to get into something in the next month. And you are going to go through the experience of a lifetime. You're going to love it. It's going to be crazy. It's going to be life-changing. And every time it would happen, they would call me, and they were still so high on the experience. I could feel it, and I found it tremendously gratifying. So, yeah, helping people do cool stuff, I get a charge out of that vicariously. I still get a charge out of it.
So, if you don't mind, I'm going to go back to one thing you mentioned, which I didn't quite expect, is some of the dangerous situations that you've been in, even though now you're very relaxed and, this is your jam. And I can imagine just the energy in your classrooms. With that said, when you were in these tough situations, and in your book, you had mentioned that you have a skill which is lowering your heart rate kind of back to the normal and calm yourself down. What are some of the tips on how to do that? Because I think I can use a lot of it.
Well, the crazy thing is it's one of two things. It's the first thing is the moment I try to focus in on what the other side is feeling, I'm under control. And I don't know why that works. There's still a lot of stuff that hostage negotiators have known for the last 40 years that now scientific data is finally bearing out. I haven't seen any reporting anywhere of scientific data contradicting the experience of hostage negotiators. And so this is one of those. And to keep our hostage negotiators, keep them under control, we always taught them, use the late night FM DJ voice. And that'll keep you under control, and it'll calm them down. And then if the very first thing I do is to focus on labeling your emotion, it sounds like this is really important to you. It sounds like this has upset you. There's something about flipping that switch that puts me under control. So the minute I just focus on the external that I'm faced with, my internal goes on autopilot and I'm fine. And the minute that I let my internal distract me off of what I need to be paying attention to around me anyway, then the internal can become overwhelming very, very quickly. And that's just a matter of practice finding out. So then, and all the rehearsal that Navy SEALs and other people like that do in dealing with stress, it's usually along 2 or 3 lines. They're focusing on the internal. One of the things that a guy coached through a kidnapping negotiation of his brother, the way he got himself under control is exactly the same way, one of the ways that SEALs do. And SEALs say to themselves, I could die. This is just a reality. And accepting that it's a reality instead of being afraid of it immediately calms them down. Samurai were famous for focusing on death all the time because it was an acceptance of something that they were then no longer afraid of. And in this kidnapping of a brother, and I coached the brother through it, he told me afterwards, early on, he just said, my brother could get killed. And I didn't hear that from him until a couple years later because he was phenomenal. And I said, and I had him come in and speak to my business school class. I said, you were great with the calibrated questions. You got to them so good that you made up a few of your own, which were superstar questions. And he said, well, okay, I'll take your word for it. He says, and the other thing, I just accepted early on my brother could die. And I was like, wow, if you come and tell my business school that, then that's all they need to know. Because understanding that the worst case scenario could happen, and then simply, okay, there's nothing I could do about this, that automatically calms people down. And then the other thing that's crazy is I was reading a blog post by Eric Barker just the other day, and I'm an avid fan of Eric Barker's blog. He said he was talking to Special Forces guys that made it a point of laughing every day in their Special Forces training. And if in Ranger School, if he could laugh once during that day, he was going to get through that day. And that's, again, laughter lightening us up and making us stronger and more resilient.
Somehow, I feel like if my brain is this like little universe, sometimes trying to reflect upon my experience and not being able to make sense of why did that happen, or why did I respond to it that way. You reminded me of when I was a very avid skater, this and skateboarder. Every day I go out to training and I have this happy and yet, kind of this, I would also find it kind of scary when I needed to try new tricks. I think all the skaters feel the same way. But if somehow during the training I fall, or I kind of land on my wrists or my knees, but I'm okay, after that incident somehow my trajectory is totally different. I notice, you know what, it's not a big deal, it's not that big of a deal to fall. Once I accept that, I realize I treat all the following situations very differently. It's a much lower scale than the story that you shared, but it's interesting.
No, it's the same. It's a different scale, but it's exactly the same principle. Yeah,
Yeah,
that makes sense.
I noticed, like, because of this very significant shift in your career, helping directing and people, benefiting them directly, I wonder, what was that transition like exactly? What I mean by that is, I love what you said in your book. Many times in life, we are our own worst enemy, critic, or obstacle. And same thing with so many people I've talked to. I want a blog, I want a podcast, and at best they have a single blog post, they have a single podcast, and they give up very easily. Do you see that in yourself, that you could also be your own obstacle? And if so, how did you convince yourself to say, I'm going to pursue this new path, I'm going to do it?
Yeah, I mean that's a tough one. It's us taking ourselves hostage again after just one thing where it didn't work out. And I suppose I get by it because it's the mindset of it's going to be okay otherwise anyway. Giving yourself a chance to fail. I mean, I could look at it a lot of different ways. It's all in what I project to have, that I have at stake in the game here. How horrific is the failure going to be? There's a lot of self-talk as to whether it's fear-based or whether it's abundance-based. And you get lucky every now and then to be given enough perspective. I mean, go spend 10 minutes on a child's cancer ward, and you're going to think you're the luckiest person on the planet. There's a homeless shelter that I've been going to recently where there's a thing for the homeless kids on building life skills. And you go talk to some of these kids where they're sleeping on cots in a room that's got 30 people in it in a mission, and they're only allowed to be there for so long. Or some other kid is living out of a car in South Central LA. Sometimes it's getting an eyeball on somebody else's perspective because we get caught up in our own problems. Our biggest problem is our biggest problem. So I think I've been lucky enough every now and then that the universe has dropped something in my lap where it's said, look, stop worrying about your problems. Things could be a lot worse. And anybody is, by definition, anybody in the United States is listening to this is already ahead of the game, because we really don't have to get up in the morning and wonder whether or not somebody's going to kill us. It's a likelihood that there's going to be an explosion, or we're not going to live to 35 because of a lack of sanitary conditions. But sometimes you just got to kind of find a way to get out of your own head to see that.
And Chris, you had mentioned, we're on a roll here. You had mentioned, news you like to read. You had mentioned a person, Eric Barker. But, I feel like, are there any other people, teachers that you thank for or learn from on a regular basis you like to share with my audience?
Well, I like Adam Grant's stuff an awful lot. His book Originals is a phenomenal book. It's thought provoking, and he's a great writer. So I like Adam Grant's stuff. Daniel Pink's got good stuff out there. Daniel Goleman's got good stuff out there. Daniel Goleman is credited with coming up with the term emotional intelligence to begin with. And his latest book, I think, is called Focus, and there's actually a chapter in it where he breaks down the 3 different types of empathy, one of which he calls cognitive empathy, which is what sociopaths do to us on a regular basis. So, they're thought-provoking thinkers that are out there. Angela Duckworth, I think, wrote a book called Grit that's out there that's very good. There are a lot of good thinkers out there. One of the things I like about Eric Barker's blog is that he typically reads all these people and then distills it for me. So
I love that. Maybe that will be a good starting point for me as well.
Eric's turned me on to a number of other books because he's written pieces about them. So, and he's fascinated. His blog is really kind of like how life works, and he's very open-minded. So he reads up on this stuff, and I don't know where he finds the time, but I like reading his stuff. It's good. He's a good guy too. He's a very good guy.
I feel the moment you describe Eric Barker, I realized that because you had a very demanding and potentially very stressful life prior, and now you're teaching, you're thinking all the time. Perhaps reading someone like Eric Barker's blog, it's almost, in a sense, it's meditation and relaxation. Do you think?
Yeah. No, it's interesting. Yeah. It's thought provoking, but not in an exhausting way. It is very relaxing to read his stuff. That's a good point.
Yeah, awesome. So I can't believe we've this 1 hour went by so quickly, and I promise to let you return to work in a few minutes. But is there any question? Are there questions that you're eager to be asked, but I haven't gotten to?
No, not really. I mean, I would just really encourage your listeners just to be playful and courageous with this stuff. You will have so much fun trying this stuff out. Don't take yourself hostage. Have fun with it and bring some great stuff into your life.
Oh, that's wonderful, Chris. And before we close, where do you recommend people to learn more about you, your company, and keep in touch?
Our website, which is blackswanltd.com. Black like the color, swan like the bird with one N, LTD like limited, blackswanltd.com. You can find out about the book. We've got a twice-a-month newsletter that comes out that's very digestible with ideas to read. It's complimentary. We got a lot of stuff that the people could use to have fun with and to get better at negotiation.
Thank you so much, Chris. Do you mind if I turn on the camera real quick? You are so wonderful. I really enjoyed this.
Yeah, I did too. Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah.
To learn more about Chris Voss and the Black Swan Group, please visit their website at blackswanltd.com. They also have a monthly newsletter